The first time he drove through the gates of Brentwood Estates, he expected to feel a sense of pride. This was the kind of neighborhood where success was measured by perfectly manicured lawns, luxury cars in the driveway, and an HOA that kept everything looking pristine. A place where people had made it. For him, this wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of years of hard work, late nights, and sacrifices finally paying off. But as he stepped out of his car, he could already feel it. The stares, the hesitation, the whispers. Across the street, a woman walking her dog slowed her pace, stealing quick glances in his direction. A man at his mailbox glanced up, then looked away just as fast. Even a passing teenager on a bike hesitated before pedaling off a little quicker than before. It was subtle, but unmistakable. He wasn't welcome here. At least, that's what they wanted him to feel. But what happens when someone refuses to be pushed out? When the very people trying to drive him away end up losing everything instead? Stay tuned, because this is a battle they never saw coming. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The sun was beginning to set when Marcus Phillips pulled his black Range Rover into the driveway of his new home in Brentwood Estates. The neighborhood was pristine, perfectly trimmed hedges, expansive green lawns, and a uniformity that screamed exclusivity. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus had worked his entire life to be able to afford. A quiet, safe community. A place where he could finally settle in and enjoy the rewards of his years of hard work. But from the moment he arrived, he could feel something was off. As he stepped out of his car, stretching after the long drive, he noticed subtle but unmistakable reactions from the neighbors. Across the street, a woman in a pastel cardigan holding a small dog paused mid-step, staring a little too long. A man in golf attire, standing by his mailbox, gave him a quick glance before looking away, suddenly invested in his phone. Even the teenager riding a bicycle past his house slowed down slightly before pedaling away faster than before. Marcus sighed. He had encountered this type of reception before. A successful black man in an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood. He had seen the surprised looks, the guarded glances, the unspoken questions. It was nothing new. His moving truck arrived a few minutes later, driven by two workers, who quickly began unloading his furniture. Marcus directed them inside, doing his best to ignore the lingering eyes from various windows and front porches. He focused on the excitement of starting fresh in his dream home, 3 bedrooms, a modern open kitchen, and a backyard large enough for summer gatherings. Just as he was setting down a box labeled office supplies, the doorbell rang. Standing on his front porch was an older woman, somewhere in her late 50s, with sharp, blue eyes and a perfectly styled bob. She wore a light beige blazer and matching slacks, giving off the aura of someone who ran things. Her lips pressed into a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello," she said, her tone polite but distant. "You must be the new homeowner. I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of Brentwood Estates HOA." Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans and extended one toward her. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Whitmore. I'm Marcus Phillips." Patricia hesitated for a split second before shaking his hand, briefly, firmly, and just long enough to be polite. "I just wanted to stop by and go over a few things," she said. "You know? To ensure everything stays up to standard." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" Patricia nodded. "I noticed your moving truck has been parked on the street for quite some time. HOA regulations require that moving vehicles be parked in driveways whenever possible. Also, I saw your trash bins near the curb earlier. Pickup isn't until Tuesday. So they should be kept out of sight until then. Marcus glanced toward his truck, which was partially in his driveway but slightly extending onto the curb. It wasn't blocking anyone's path. And as for the trash bins, they had been left near the garage for just a short while as he figured out where to store them. Noted, he said evenly. Patricia smiled again, this time with a hint of satisfaction. Wonderful. And I trust that you'll keep your lawn properly maintained. We have very specific guidelines about grass length and overall presentation. First impressions matter. After all. Marcus felt a flicker of irritation but kept his expression neutral. Of course. Patricia gave him one last once-over, as if assessing whether he truly belonged. Then, with a curt nod, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the sidewalk. Marcus exhaled slowly, shaking his head. That was fast. Over the next few days, Marcus tried to settle in. He kept his lawn trimmed, made sure his trash bins were placed properly, and avoided leaving anything outside that might raise eyebrows. But even as he followed the rules, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Whenever he went outside, he caught glimpses of neighbors whispering amongst themselves. Conversations seemed to pause when he walked by. If he waved, the response was often hesitant or delayed. Then, on his fourth morning in Brentwood Estates, he received his first official HOA notice. The letter, delivered directly to his mailbox, cited a violation for failure to properly maintain driveway cleanliness. Confused, Marcus stepped outside and looked at his driveway. It was spotless, aside from a few faint tire marks from his own vehicle. As he scanned the rest of the street, he noticed something interesting. Several driveways had similar marks. Some even had oil stains or scattered leaves. Yet none of those homes had violation notices taped to their doors. Marcus sighed and folded the letter. So that's how it's going to be. Marcus tossed the HOA violation letter onto his kitchen counter and exhaled. All right. So Patricia wants to play games. He wasn't the type to let small things get under his skin. But something about this felt different. It wasn't just about a dirty driveway, it was about control. A test. But he wasn't about to fail it. The next morning, Marcus made sure to clean his driveway thoroughly. Even though there had been nothing wrong with it in the first place. He used a hose to wash off any faint tire marks, ensuring the pavement was spotless. As he finished, he glanced across the street at his neighbor's house. A white Audi with deep oil stains sat in their driveway, untouched by an HOA notice. Double standards. Marcus shook his head and went back inside, deciding to ignore it for now. Maybe, just maybe, Patricia was just a stickler for rules. But that optimism didn't last long. A few days later, he found another HOA violation notice in his mailbox. This time, it was for overgrown grass. Marcus frowned. He had just mowed his lawn 2 days ago. It wasn't even close to being overgrown. That night, he took a walk around the neighborhood. Dozens of homes had taller grass than his. Some houses had weeds creeping up along the sidewalk. Others had untrimmed hedges. Yet, there were no other violation notices taped to their doors. It was clear now, Patricia was targeting him. The next morning, as Marcus was drinking his coffee on his front porch, he spotted Patricia standing in a small group with a few other neighbors down the street. She glanced in his direction and whispered something, making the others turn their heads. Some nodded in agreement, while others just looked uncomfortable. Marcus smirked. So she's rallying the troops now. He wasn't going to let this slide. That afternoon, he took out his phone and started documenting everything. He took photos of his driveway, clean. He recorded video of his lawn, well maintained. He walked through the neighborhood and snapped pictures of other homes that had actual violations but weren't receiving notices. By the end of the week, his collection of evidence was growing fast. Then, one night, something even more ridiculous happened. Just as Marcus was about to go to bed, his doorbell rang. He glanced at his phone, 10:43 p.m. Frowning, he walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Patricia. With an annoyed sigh, he opened the door. "Something I can help you with?" Patricia folded her arms, her expression sharp. "I received multiple complaints from residents about your porch light." Marcus blinked. "My what?" She gestured toward the small light beside his front door. "It's excessively bright and disruptive. HOA guidelines state that outdoor lighting should be at a reasonable level." Marcus turned his head and stared at the light. It was a standard porch light, the same kind every other house had. He exhaled, his patience wearing thin. "I don't see how this is any different from my neighbor's lights. I'm simply enforcing the rules," Patricia said, her lips curving into a tight smile. "I suggest you replace it with a dimmer bulb, or you might receive another violation." Marcus clenched his jaw. She was getting desperate. He took a slow breath and nodded. "Sure. I'll get right on that." Patricia studied him for a moment, as if searching for a reaction. But when she got nothing, she gave a curt nod and walked away. As soon as she was gone, Marcus grabbed his phone, opened the neighborhood's online HOA portal, and began digging into the rule book. If Patricia wanted to play, he was going to play smarter. This wasn't just an overbearing HOA president. This was targeted harassment. And he wasn't about to let it slide. Marcus had dealt with petty HOA nonsense before. But Patricia was taking things to another level. She wasn't just nitpicking, she was actively trying to push him out. And now, she was getting bolder. A few mornings after the ridiculous porch light incident, Marcus was sipping his coffee when he noticed a letter in his mailbox with a law firm's logo. Frowning, he tore it open and read, "Dear Mr. Phillips, it has come to our attention that your occupancy of the property located at Brentwood Estates is in question. Due to multiple complaints from concerned residents, we are requesting immediate proof of ownership to ensure compliance with HOA regulations. Failure to respond within 7 days may result in further legal action, including potential removal from the premises." Marcus read the letter again, then laughed. Unbelievable. This was straight up an eviction attempt. She was really trying to make it look like he didn't belong here. He knew exactly who was behind it. Grabbing his phone, he dialed a number and waited. "Joe Martinez. Real estate law. How can I help?" "Hey Joe. It's Marcus." "Oh. Hey man. How's the new house treating you?" Marcus chuckled dryly. "That's actually why I'm calling. I just got a letter from some law firm claiming there are concerns about my ownership of the house." Joe sighed. "Let me guess, HOA harassment." "Bingo. Send me a copy of the letter," Joe said. "I'll look into who's behind this and how serious it is. But just so you know, they legally have no right to demand this from you. Public property records exist for a reason." "That's what I figured," Marcus said. "But I need to make sure they don't try to escalate this into something bigger," Joe chuckled. "Oh. I'll make sure of that." Let's hit them back where it hurts. Marcus hung up and got to work. First, he printed out all the HOA violation notices he had received so far. Then, he went on a walk through the neighborhood and took even more photos of violations that were conveniently ignored: untrimmed hedges, cluttered yards, broken fences. To top it off, he pulled public records of property ownership in Brentwood Estates. With just a few clicks, he downloaded his own deed, a clear, legal record that he owned his home. By the time he was done, he had a folder full of evidence. When Patricia came for him, he'd be ready. Later that week, Marcus was watering his plants when he saw Patricia and another HOA board member, Stephen Reynolds, walking toward his house. Perfect. Ah, Mr. Phillips, Patricia said with an all-too-pleasant smile. I assume you received the letter. Marcus nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans. I did. And I assume you know this is completely illegal. Stephen, an older man in a navy blue polo, cleared his throat. The HOA is simply responding to community concerns. Some residents. Marcus interrupted. Or just you? Patricia narrowed her eyes. We have received multiple. Marcus pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. I have official property records confirming my ownership. He turned the phone toward them. Anyone could have checked this before sending a fake eviction threat. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. Patricia, however, wasn't done. We were just following protocol. No. You weren't. Marcus cut in, stepping forward. Because I've done my own research. He pulled a thick folder from under his arm and handed it to Stephen. Inside, you'll find documented evidence of every single time you've selectively enforced HOA rules against me. Pictures, dates, and side-by-side comparisons of my so-called violations versus the ones you ignored. Stephen flipped through the pages, his face paling. Marcus turned back to Patricia, voice calm but firm. Let me be very clear, if I get one more fraudulent violation, a fake legal threat, or any more attempts to intimidate me out of my own home, I'll be filing a formal discrimination lawsuit against the HOA. Patricia's expression barely changed, but Marcus could see her nostrils flare. Stephen cleared his throat again. Well? I think we should take some time to review this and do that, Marcus said, crossing his arms. For the first time since he'd moved in, Patricia didn't have a response. As she turned to leave, Marcus smirked. Checkmate. But he wasn't done yet. For the first time since moving into Brentwood Estates, Marcus felt like he had finally turned the tables. He had caught Patricia red-handed in her attempt to bully him out of the neighborhood. But he knew her type, she wouldn't back down that easily. Sure enough, 2 days later, Marcus found another HOA violation notice in his mailbox. This time? Failure to comply with approved aesthetic standards, front door color. Marcus stared at the letter and then at his black front door. A completely normal, modern color that matched at least 3 other houses on his street. Unbelievable. Instead of getting angry, Marcus grinned. She's desperate now. That evening, Marcus called his lawyer. Joe. She hit you with a front door color violation. Joe laughed out loud. Oh. She's spiraling now. Yeah. And I think it's time to end this. What's the move? Marcus smirked. There's an HOA meeting in 3 days. I'm bringing the entire neighborhood into this, Joe chuckled. You're about to make her worst nightmare come true. The Brentwood Estates HOA meetings were usually quiet affairs. held in the community clubhouse with only a handful of residents attending. But tonight, it was packed. Marcus had spread the word, discreetly. Of course. He had spoken to long-time residents. The ones who had quietly put up with Patricia's micromanagement and selective enforcement for years. When he arrived, nearly 20 homeowners were in attendance. And they weren't happy. Patricia sat at the head of the table, looking confident, until she saw how many people had shown up. Her smile faltered slightly. Stephen Reynolds sat beside her, looking even more nervous. "All right," Patricia began, clearing her throat. "Let's begin with our agenda." First, Marcus raised a hand. "I have an issue that needs to be addressed before we move forward." Patricia forced a tight smile. "Mr. Phillips, we have a schedule. I think the community would love to hear about this." Marcus interrupted. Several people murmured in agreement. Patricia sighed. "Fine. What is it?" Marcus stood and pulled out his folder. "I've lived here for less than a month. And I've already received 5 separate HOA violations, all for things that other residents have never been penalized for." He started flipping through the documented photos. Driveway marks, ignored on 3 other homes, overgrown grass. "I have pictures of homes in far worse condition. The porch light, identical to my neighbor's." Patricia's face remained neutral. But Stephen shifted in his seat. Then Marcus pulled out the letter from the law firm. "But the biggest issue. Patricia tried to falsely accuse me of illegally occupying my own home." Gasps echoed through the room. A few residents started whispering. Marcus turned to Stephen. "As a board member, were you aware of this?" Stephen swallowed hard. Well. The HOA has the right to investigate complaints. But I wasn't involved in that decision." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying Patricia acted alone?" Stephen hesitated. I don't know." Patricia cut in. "Mr. Phillips, this is a gross misrepresentation of." Marcus pulled out one last document. "Actually, let's talk about this," he said, holding up a legal property record. Then he smiled. "Because I own your house." The room went completely silent. Patricia's face drained of color. Stephen's jaw literally dropped. Marcus took his time, letting the moment sink in. Then he explained. "When I started looking into HOA policies, I checked the property records for this entire community. That's when I discovered that your home, Patricia, was bought by an investment firm 2 years ago." He let the words settle before continuing. "And last month, I bought it from them." Someone choked on their drink. The whispers turned into excited murmurs. Patricia's hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible." Marcus grinned. "Oh. But it's not." Then he pulled out one last document, the official deed transfer. "I'm technically your landlord now." Patricia shot up from her seat. This is harassment." "You can't. I can absolutely enforce the HOA rules on you now." Laughter rippled through the room. Patricia was shaking. "I'll be speaking with a lawyer," Marcus shrugged. "Feel free. But in the meantime, you might want to mow your lawn? I saw some weeds growing." More laughter. Stephen rubbed his face. "And then? The final blow." Marcus turned to the room. "I move to have Patricia removed as HOA president for unethical practices." A beat of silence. Then, seconded. Someone called out. A third voice followed. "I second as well." Patricia's lips parted in shock. Stephen sagged in his chair. And just like that, The downfall had begun. Patricia sat stiffly. Her face pale as whispers spread through the room. This wasn't just a challenge to her authority, this was a complete collapse of her power. Marcus leaned back in his seat, watching the HOA board squirm. I move to have Patricia removed as HOA president for unethical practices, he repeated, his voice calm but firm. And then, to Patricia's horror, the floodgates opened. I second that, called out Mrs. Langley, a long-time resident who had always been too afraid to speak up before. I third it, muttered Mr. Dawson, a retired teacher. Honestly? We all know she's been on a power trip for years. Now. More voices joined in. She fined me last year for my mailbox being slightly crooked. She threatened to evict my daughter for parking in our own driveway. She told me I had to repaint my house. But I checked the HOA rules, there was nothing about my color. Patricia's hands were visibly shaking now. Wait, this is completely out of order, she stammered. You can't just. Marcus pulled out another document, the HOA bylaws. Actually, he said, flipping to the right page. The board is allowed to vote out a president for abusing their power if enough residents petition for it. Stephen, still looking pale, cleared his throat. I think it's best we discuss this further. No need, Marcus said smoothly, already pulling out a list of resident signatures he had collected over the past few days. I already have the required votes. Stephen's jaw dropped. Patricia's face twisted with rage. You can't do this, she hissed. But then? Mr. Dawson stood up and pointed at her. Oh. We absolutely can. And it's about damn time. Applause broke out. Patricia looked around, her once loyal subjects turning on her one by one. Stephen, clearly sensing the shift, coughed awkwardly. Given the circumstances, I believe we should hold a formal vote. Marcus smirked. Go right ahead. The vote wasn't even close. Out of the 7 HOA board members, only one still backed Patricia. The rest? They all voted to remove her. Patricia stood frozen, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her standing. Effective immediately, Stephen said, still avoiding eye contact with Marcus. Patricia Whitmore is no longer the HOA president. The room exploded into applause. And just like that, her reign was over. As the meeting wrapped up, Patricia sat in stunned silence. She had lost. Marcus walked over and leaned in just close enough for her to hear. You tried to make me feel like I didn't belong here, he said softly. Now, you're the one who doesn't belong. Patricia's face twisted with fury. But she had no power left. Marcus gave her a final smirk, then turned and walked away. For the first time since moving to Brentwood Estates, he finally felt like this was his home. And now, he wasn't just a homeowner. He was the one enforcing the rules. How do you feel about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear your feedback to improve even more. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our latest videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.